My son has been born for a month, but I increasingly feel he isn't my child. I even feel like I never gave birth. There's just a scar on my stomach. None of the other symptoms moms have at the postpartum center show up for me. I can't even pump a drop of milk. And I don't feel any motherly love towards him. It's like I inwardly reject him. After 20-something days of overthinking on my own, I finally couldn't resist and got a full checkup from a specialist. When the results came back, the irritated specialist said to me, "Are you kidding me? You say you're in the postpartum period, but your report shows you've never even been pregnant." This news hit me like a ton of bricks. What on earth is happening? My whole pregnancy was spent with my husband Gary taking meticulous care of me. As soon as we found out I was pregnant, he arranged for my prenatal doctor, and he never missed a single appointment with me. He picked up all the reports himself, saying he didn't want me to worry. We both saw our baby's hands and feet on the ultrasound report. I was desperate to tell Gary about this, but I couldn't reach him at all. Since giving birth, his attitude towards me has completely changed compared to when I was pregnant. We've barely spoken 10 words this month. A crazy idea popped into my head. Back at the postpartum center, I sent off some of the baby's hair, along with mine and Gary's, for a paternity test. As expected, the baby wasn't biologically related to me, but he was Gary's biological son. So who gave birth to this child? What is Gary hiding from me? I met Gary through work. When I was 22, just graduated from college, my parents both died in a car accident, leaving me an entire company. Lacking hands-on experience, I followed the advice of some uncles and hired a professional manager to help run the business, Gary. Gary was 30 then, smart, capable, tall, handsome, and had the charm of a mature man. The moment I saw him, I had a good impression. He proved to be talented at work. I learned from him, and he was willing to teach me how to manage the company. Never having dated before, I quickly developed deep feelings for him. Eventually, I mustered the courage to confess to him, and naturally, we got together and married soon after. After marriage, Gary suggested I become a full-time housewife. Trusting him, I was happy to hand things over, letting him spread his wings at the company. Soon, he expressed wanting a child, so I focused on preparing for pregnancy. Finally, when he was 33, I got pregnant. We had tried hard for this baby. I had to take a lot of injections. Gary didn't want me to suffer, so he'd always go to the hospital, get the medication, and learn to give me the shots himself. At the time, I was incredibly touched, feeling that I had met the most wonderful man in the world. Thinking back now, the reason I had symptoms of pregnancy without actually being pregnant was likely due to those injections. Since I got pregnant, Gary treated me even more attentively, which I believe tightened our bond. Now, I realize he probably accompanied me to each prenatal visit so I wouldn't discover I wasn't actually pregnant. Even the delivery date was chosen by Gary. I had a C-section, so I was out cold from anesthesia and knew nothing until I woke up next to the baby. This was likely the same day that other woman gave birth. I'm desperate for the truth. My first thought was to track down my prenatal doctor, Lily, but I found out she resigned and moved with her family a month ago. Too coincidental. My suspicions are being confirmed bit by bit. I copied my medical records. It was clearly stated that I underwent a molar pregnancy removal, not a C-section. The specialist looked at the records with sympathy. You probably received excessive ovulation and hormone shots, leading to the molar pregnancy, which explains your pregnancy symptoms. Moreover, the surgical notes show that, after removing the molar pregnancy, your fallopian tubes were also removed. I'm sorry, but you won't be able to conceive again. My mind went blank, all sounds faded away. I don't even remember how I left the hospital. In the car, my body was still trembling uncontrollably. Remembering the past with Gary, I couldn't stop myself from breaking down, sobbing at the steering wheel. Gary, we've been together for 4 years. I trusted you completely. Why would you do this to me? I frantically called Gary, but he never picked up. I started calming down, wondering why he wanted me to believe the child was mine and why he prevented me from being able to have children. What could be his gain? He could have just been with his mistress and their child, instead of separating them. Unless... An alarming thought hit me. Gary wanted their child to be the sole heir to my company. He was planning to take over. The thought left me drenched in sweat. I immediately reached out to a trusted contact in the company, and as soon as she answered, Mary excitedly said, "Boss, finally. I've been trying to reach you. Do you know the company's undergone a huge change?" My heart sank. The company was in trouble. Since I stopped being involved, Gary had fired the 4 uncles who advised me to hire him. These uncles were my dad's trusted allies. He also ousted most of my original team. Those who stayed were pushed to marginal roles, with all key positions filled by Gary's loyalists. Gary now holds all the power in the company. I checked my phone. Gary had blocked calls from former employees, which is why I'd never heard from them. Since trying to conceive, I hardly left the house, and whenever I did, it was with Gary, so anyone trying to reach me was turned away. I was boiling inside. Rage pounded through my temples like a drum. Gary really knows how to play his cards. But on the upside, he doesn't know I'm aware of the truth yet. I've got the upper hand now. In the afternoon, I met each uncle, sincerely apologizing and begging them to return to the company, to help me oust Gary and save the business. They were all genuinely kind to me, and when they heard what happened, they were furious. A net was slowly being cast around Gary. When I returned to the maternity center in the evening, Gary finally called me back. His tone was cold. "Why'd you call me so many times? What's up?" I suppressed my anger and playfully said, "I missed you. Come get me and our son, I don't want to stay here anymore." Gary paused for a moment and surprisingly agreed. That really caught me off guard. On the day we left the center, Gary didn't come himself but sent a driver and a nanny instead. When we got home, Gary was whispering to some woman I didn't know, making her laugh endlessly. Hearing us enter, the woman jumped away from Gary. I squinted to get a better look at her. She looked pale and delicate, a bit puffy, with a timid air that was almost endearing. For some reason, she seemed familiar, even though I was certain we'd never met before. But seeing her with Gary, it was clear their relationship was unusual. I hooked my arm around Gary's and asked, "Honey, who is this?" The woman's eyes dimmed a little. Gary immediately pulled his arm away from me, creating distance. "This is Belle, the nanny I hired for the baby. She'll handle everything about the baby, and you just need to rest." He then introduced me to Belle. "Belle, this is Selena, the baby's mom." I sensed a slight pause when he said mom. Belle quickly went over to hold the baby, her eyes filling with tears as she looked at him. I looked at her and then at the baby, suddenly realizing she looked strikingly similar to him. Could she be the birth mother? Anger boiled inside me. Gary had the nerve to bring her into our home openly. Not wanting to deal with them, I told Gary I was tired and went straight to my room. Gary didn't seem to care and kept playing with the baby and Belle, a picture of a happy little family. Gary truly had no regard for me anymore. I thought for a moment and called my friend Cindy. When she answered, Cindy's cheerful voice came through. "Selena, calling me at this hour, do you miss me?" Hearing her voice made my emotions stir, but I pushed them down and said seriously, "Cindy, doesn't your brother run a detective agency? I need him to investigate someone." Maybe sensing my tone, Cindy sounded concerned. "Sure, what's going on?" "Something serious, let's meet in person to talk." Just after hanging up, I heard my mother-in-law Linda's shocked voice in the living room. "Belle, what are you doing here?" "Mom, Belle will be living with us to take care of the child," Gary responded for Belle. "Gary, are you crazy? What if Selena finds out?" Linda's voice was deliberately lowered, but I couldn't make out the rest. But it was clear, Linda was in on it. This whole family was plotting against me. Having made up my mind, I opened the bedroom door, feigning surprise. "Mom, when did you get here?" Linda was startled and slowly turned to me, looking guilty. "Selena, you're home. I brought you some soup, have it while it's hot." "Thanks, Mom." I smiled at Linda. Oh, this is Belle, the nanny my husband hired. Can you show her the ropes around here? Especially the parts about what not to do to upset the homeowners. I glanced over at Belle, seeing her go pale. Oh, don't worry, we'll take this slow. Cindy's brother Tim worked quickly. By the third day, Cindy set up a meeting and brought Tim along. This Belle, she's got quite the history with your husband. Tim laid a stack of documents in front of me. Belle and Gary went way back, childhood sweethearts, classmates since middle school. They started dating in high school. Belle couldn't get into a good college while Gary got into Cambridge. Gary wanted to stay with Belle and enrolled in a local college, but his mother threatened him, so he gave up. They kept their relationship secret during college until Belle married an older man for his money to help her brother Leo. That's when she cut ties with Gary. Unaware of the truth, Gary looked for her for years until right when we started dating, Belle's husband passed away, and they reunited. Meaning while Gary and I dated and got married, he was always seeing Belle on the side. No wonder his attitude toward me changed out of nowhere early in our relationship. But why continue with me afterward? Belle and I were pregnant and gave birth around the same time, even had the same doctor. Without a doubt, she's the birth mother of the baby. All the reports I saw must have been hers. Gary even financed a business for Leo. Belle's brother is a good-for-nothing, constantly hitting Belle up for cash. Under Gary's protection, he's skimming from my company to resell everything. Cindy pressed me for details, and I tried to downplay the situation. Otherwise, Cindy might just go on a rampage. Gary's a bastard, I'm going over there to teach him a lesson. Cindy was ready to storm off. Tim held her back. Cindy, don't ruin it. I'm sure Selena's got a plan. I gave Tim a grateful look. Yes, I have a plan. Cindy, don't worry, I won't let him off easy. I'll need your help with a few things. I had Tim install hidden cameras throughout the house. Since Gary brought Belle to me, I would use it to my advantage. In the following month, I hired another nanny. At first, Gary was annoyed, asking why we needed another one. I looked innocently at him. I noticed Belle didn't seem well, so I thought another nanny could lighten her load. We can afford it anyway. Gary thought it over and nodded, praising me for being thoughtful. Belle's face only got worse. During the day, I'd make a show of being close to the baby while the other nanny made sure Belle couldn't get near him. Every night when Gary got home, I'd cling to him, leaving him no chance to be with Belle. I'd even act all lovey-dovey with Gary in front of Belle, feeling her hateful gaze on my back. Yeah, that's right, let it all out. There were plenty of times when, after everyone fell asleep at night, Gary wanted to go find Belle, but I stopped him from doing so. A month later, Belle couldn't take it anymore. That night, Gary quietly got out of bed after I fell asleep and went to Belle's room. This time, I intentionally didn't stop him and instead, I turned on the surveillance video. In the video, Belle was in Gary's arms, crying her heart out as she complained to him, "This Selena is too much. She clings to you and our son day and night. They're supposed to be mine, do you even know how painful this is for me?" Gary consoled her with a look full of pity. "Belle, you know I don't love her. You're the only one for me. Don't worry about her. She's already treating our son like he's hers, and she can't have any more children. Just wait a little longer until I completely get her out of the company, okay? Then find a way to keep her away from my son. I don't want her near him." All right, I'll figure something out. Please stop crying. Your tears break my heart." As they talked, they began to kiss, leading to something intimate. Watching them wrapped up in each other made me feel disgusted. The suspicions I'd had all along were finally confirmed. I didn't feel sad anymore, just furious. The next morning, Gary asked me, "Selena, since there's someone to look after the kid now, you don't have to stay home all the time. Is there anything you're thinking of doing?" I looked at Gary with an innocent face and said, "Yeah, I'm bored too. Maybe I should just go back to work at the company." "No way." Gary reflexively objected. I caught a glimpse of Belle frantically signaling him. Gary finally gave in. Okay, but the company has changed quite a bit. I'm worried you might not adjust. I tugged at his arm and teased, I haven't worked in years, you think I'm serious about it? I just need to kill some time. And just like that, I smoothly got back to the company. At the office, I mostly wandered around and every now and then complained to Gary about how boring it was and how I wanted out. Another month passed and Gary relaxed his guard around me, no longer keeping a close watch. What he didn't know was that I was waiting for a chance. And that chance came quickly. Gary had to fly out for a 10-day industry summit. I playfully begged him to take me along, but he refused. However, Belle left with him at the same time. I pretended to sob bitterly, but inside, I was grinning ear to ear. The big show I'd been preparing for was about to begin. Once Gary was gone, I swiftly took control of the company, reinstating 4 of my uncles to take over the key departments. My first order of business was to restrain his loyalists to prevent them from notifying him, replacing them with my own people. In those 2 months, we hadn't been idle. Each uncle had discreetly recruited former key employees back to the fold with higher salaries. And I wasn't just wandering around the company. I learned every detail of its current state. I'd also visited our important clients and suppliers as the company's major owner. Business people prioritize profit. If there's money to be made, they don't care who's in charge. It took just 5 days to ensure a smooth transition for the company. But there was still one more person to deal with. I asked him to arrange for someone to get Belle's brother to purchase a massive amount of goods, paying the deposit ahead of time. That moron is used to taking payment before getting goods from Gary. Thinking he hit the jackpot, he eagerly took the deposit. With Gary out of the country, he went to the company looking for the former procurement manager, only to find out the team had changed. The new manager ignored him and had him escorted out. Panicked, he tried to contact Gary but, of course, I wouldn't give him the chance. Tim's guys cornered him, threatening that if he couldn't deliver, he'd owe triple the penalty fee. Otherwise, his life was at risk. I have no clue where Tim found these crew-cut, tattooed henchmen, but they scared Belle's brother so much he coughed up all his money and even borrowed millions in high-interest loans. 10 days later, when Gary and Belle finally came home, I was on the couch, greeting them with an amused expression, finally back, huh? They froze for a moment before letting go of each other's hands. I raised an eyebrow and said, no need to stop. Keep holding hands. I don't mind since I'm about to divorce Gary anyway. Selena, what are you talking about? Gary was taken aback. I wiped the smile off my face, stood up, and faced Gary. I said, I'm filing for divorce. Selena, do you even know what you're saying? Gary's voice lowered. Oh, I know perfectly well. And I also know you have a charming son with her. I pointed at Belle. Gary's face was full of shock while Belle collapsed to the floor. Gary, why did this happen? We've been together for 4 years, why'd you treat me like this? Why deny me the chance to be a mother? Thinking of all that, I couldn't control my emotions and raised my voice. Gary's face went through various shades before settling down. Since you know, there's no point in hiding it. Before marrying you, I was with Belle. If not for your threats to my mom, I'd never marry you. But even after marrying you, I'd never want you to have my kids. Only Belle can do that for me. And our kids will inherit your company. As for you, forget about having any more children. It took me a moment to process. I threatened his mom. You want to divorce me? Well, your company's all under my control now. Fine, then leave with nothing. Gary sneered arrogantly. Chuckling, I replied, if I were you, I'd check the company first before talking like that. Gary's face changed, he sensed something amiss. After making a few calls, he finally got through to someone. What happened to the company? Gary anxiously asked. I didn't know what was said, but Gary's face grew darker. Hanging up, he spat, Selena, you conniving witch. I shrugged. Speaking of conniving, you taught me everything I know. So, thanks for that. Gary, blinded by anger, moved to attack me. Tim, who had been hiding in the bedroom, rushed out and knocked him back with a kick. I pressed my foot hard on Gary's right hand, my voice cold and steely. You've got 5 days to consider your options about the divorce. With that, I left. I'd already sent the kid to Gary's mom's place in advance. I figured I'd let them stay in that house for the time being. After all, I left them a little surprise. 5 days should be enough. After I left, Gary went to the company and, predictably, was shown the door. He went back to his old customers, but none of them were willing to talk to him. It's a cutthroat world. You're a winner or a loser. That's just reality. When he got home all angry and full of rage, Belle's brother showed up. Leo was crying like a baby, clutching Gary's leg and spilling everything that had happened to him. You could see in the surveillance video that Gary was so mad, veins were popping out of his head. He kicked Leo aside, shouting, "You're useless. Can't you think for a second that it's obviously a trap?" Belle rushed to help her brother up, tears streaming down her face, yelling at Gary, "Don't blame him. Selena set him up on purpose. What do we do now?" Gary gritted his teeth. "Selena, she wants a divorce? It's not gonna be that easy." Despite being furious, Gary ended up covering for Belle's brother's mess out of his own pocket, leaving himself financially weakened. You can't deny he truly loved Belle. After that incident, Belle was even more gentle with him. For the next 5 days, they didn't leave the house. On surveillance, Gary was like a machine, always dragging Belle to bed. Belle was battered and bruised, bleeding every day. After passing out once more from the ordeal, Belle locked herself in the bathroom and called the police. While waiting the half hour for the cops to show, Gary was outside the bathroom, losing it, banging on the door with his body. When the police arrived, Gary was on the ground, clutching his groin in spasms. Both Gary and Belle ended up in the hospital, where Belle was diagnosed with permanent injury, and Gary, well, his was a break from the impact. Tim told me about it on the 5th day. I clapped my hands. Time to wrap this up. I filed a lawsuit against Gary for bodily harm and marriage fraud. I submitted the surveillance footage and my medical report. The court ruled against Gary, recognizing the fraud, granting me a divorce and all the income during the marriage. The assault charge still needed investigation, but Gary was allowed bail due to his injuries. The company issued a statement. Gary, the former general manager, was fired for embezzlement, harming the company's interests, and will never be rehired. The industry was up in arms. You have to admit, Gary was quite the talent, once making our marriage the talk of the town. Now, after this announcement, companies are refusing to hire him. He's become an outcast, despised by everyone. After the judgment, I visited Gary in the hospital with the verdict. He was a shell of himself, nowhere near the confident man he once was. He looked at me with vacant eyes. "How did you know?" I knew my body. No way I'd had a baby without knowing. "Gary, I used to play dumb because I loved you, but I'm no fool. You shouldn't have used my love against me. I'm here to ask, what did you mean by saying I threatened your mom? What's that about?" "Selena, don't act dumb. Didn't you tell my mom that if I didn't marry you, you'd ruin me? If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have ended up here." Turns out, his mom, Kate, was the one behind my pain. I stared at him coldly. "Gary, I'm not the one who ruined you. It was your mom." Not wanting to get into it further, I turned to leave but remembered something. "Oh, how was your time with Belle?" Gary's eyes flared with fury. "It was you." "Yep, it was me. I spiked the water filter, and it worked pretty well." Gary tried to get up and hit me. "Don't move, or whatever's been fixed might just break again," I said, glancing at his groin. His face turned a deep purple, furious. "And don't think about suing me. That filter's been scrubbed clean by now." "Selena, you bitch." I didn't stick around for more of his rants, left the hospital, leaving Gary screaming in pain. Just when I thought everything was getting back to normal, trouble came knocking. 3 days after seeing Gary, I ran into Kate at work. My ex-mother-in-law was begging me not to press charges against her son. Perfect, I didn't even have to find her. She came to me. Brought her to my office. I had a few things to say. Why shouldn't I sue your son? I asked straight out. Selena, you and Gary were married. What he had with her was just a fling. He loves you. Oh, do you know who gave birth to your grandson? And I heard I threatened you to make Gary marry me? When exactly was that? Kate's face went pale, her lips quivered, speechless. So, why should I let your son off the hook? Kate dropped to her knees. It was my fault. I didn't approve of Belle, so I used you as a shield. Belle's nothing, you're beautiful and capable. Marrying you was best for Gary. I thought if you married, he'd end things with Belle. But he was obsessed. When I found out they were still together, she was already pregnant. My grandson, I had no choice but to look the other way. Once the baby came, I learned Gary was bold enough to make you fake a pregnancy and bring Belle's kid to you. Please, he messed up, but you're divorced. You weren't actually harmed. Let him go. Kate crawled at my feet, like trying to grab my leg again. I kicked her aside and spoke, my voice chill. If I told you your son made sure I can't have kids again, would you still think I wasn't harmed? Kate froze, not knowing this. Kate, I'm never forgiving you or your son. Your family's gonna live in misery forever because of me. I had what I needed, called security to kick her out. Selena, I'll never stop. I'll be here every day. I'll ruin your business. Kate yelled as she was dragged out. I thought she'd left, but as I left work, there she was, ghost-like across the street. I was disgusted, turned to go back inside. She saw me turn and dashed across the street. In that instant, a car came speeding by, missing me, but hitting Kate. She flew 3 feet in the air, suspended for a moment before crashing down. Blood everywhere. I was frozen in place, totally freaked out. If I hadn't turned around, that car would have hit me. Everything was chaos, screeches, screams, people calling 911. A gut-wrenching scream of "Mom!" brought me back to reality. I saw someone get out of the car and rush towards Kate, holding her tightly and crying out for their mom. It was Gary. So he was after me. He actually tried to run me over. I was terrified and couldn't bear to get closer, so I just headed back to the office to wait for updates. Soon, police and an ambulance arrived, taking Kate to the hospital and arresting Gary. That's when I dared to step outside and talk to the police about what happened. Selena, you witch. You killed my mother. Gary glared at me like he was about to explode and tried to charge at me. Don't move. The officer shouted, pinning him to the ground. As the victim, I went to the station to give my statement. From the officer, I learned I'd narrowly escaped death. Gary wanted revenge and was waiting outside my office. The moment I stepped out, he tried to hit me. I happened to catch a glimpse of Kate and turned to avoid her. That split-second turn saved my life. Kate wasn't as lucky. She was too fast and ran into the car. She suffered a severe brain injury and multiple fractures. Although she survived, she's bedridden for life. I let out a deep sigh. Karma is real. Cindy and Tim came to pick me up at the station. Cindy was pale as a ghost and hugged me, sobbing out loud. I comforted her and thanked Tim. Sorry for troubling you to come all this way. Tim looked at his sister and chuckled. When she heard you almost got hit, this silly girl was so scared she could barely walk, so I tagged along. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, I'm not going anywhere. Don't say that. Cindy turned even paler. Tim and I shared a knowing grin. Life gradually returned to normal. Working, reading, exercising, shopping, traveling, I kept a full schedule. I didn't care to check on Gary or his family anymore. Cindy, being the gossip she is, nags Tim constantly to dig up news. Gary got slapped with a 20-year sentence for attempted murder. Kate ended up in a nursing home because she was alone and broke, with no one else to take care of her. Her condition wasn't great. She ended up developing sores soon after since no one was really looking after her given her complicated situation. After Belle got out of the hospital, she up and left the city, ditching her kid. Her injuries left her unable to work, so she's just scraping by. The community reached out about adopting her baby. Look, the kid's innocent, but I'm no saint. After all the pain his parents caused me, I couldn't just let that go. I've decided that even if I never have my own kids, I can lead a great life solo, so I turned down their request. I've grown from all this pain and stopped pinning my hopes on love. I travel, I explore different cultures, and I enrich my mental world. Maybe one day things will change. Maybe I'll meet someone truly special. But that's a story for another time, right?